I stood up at my mother's memorial and told the room her best friend killed her. Someone dropped a glass. It burst like a gunshot, and every adult face turned to me as if I had set the building on fire. Tell me if you were 9 years old, with a secret burning a hole through your pocket, would you have stayed quiet or said what I did? My name is Rachel, and this is the story the flowers couldn't hide, the story that crawled out from under casseroles and condolences. It starts in an 8th-floor apartment that felt like Saturday morning, with sun on white cabinets and a blue couch that swallowed you whole after long school days. Mom wrote children's books at a little desk in the spare room. Dad designed bridges that made the skyline look like a promise, and every Friday, the three of us curled into a soft pile with popcorn and the same old blanket that smelled like butter and laundry soap. If I could bottle a feeling, it would be that living room on a Friday night, the glow of a movie on our faces, my mother's hand, finding mine without looking. Happiness, simple and loud. The knock that changed everything didn't sound dramatic. It sounded polite. We opened our door to a woman with a basket wrapped in plastic and a smile that sat just a little too carefully on her face. Her name was Gladys, new in the building, new in the city. The kind of neighbor who says she hates to be a bother while already stepping into your kitchen. Mom handed her cookies, said, "Come by any time," because that was who my mother was. And that's what kindness does when it hasn't learned to be suspicious yet. You know what I mean. At first it was sweet. Coffee on Tuesdays, a rideshare split to the market on Thursdays, a babysit here and there, when my parents did their once-a-month date. She was helpful, always, almost professionally helpful. She noticed our empty paper towel roll, without being told, reached for it, swapped it out, smiled. People like that make you feel taken care of. Sometimes, they make you forget to ask a question you should have asked. Like, why are you here so much, and what are you looking at, when you think no one sees you? I was 9, so I didn't have big words for small alarms. I just knew that sometimes, when she looked at our framed photos, there was something hungry behind her eyes. Not sad, not happy. Something else, like she was doing math in her head, and the answer kept coming up short. She'd touch my mom's mug and turn it. A 1/4 inch. Slide. A sweater sleeve between finger and thumb, laugh, and try Dad's jacket on in the hallway mirror, like a costume that didn't quite fit yet. Some smiles don't wrinkle the eyes. Some compliments land like inventory. Some kindnesses keep a list. One afternoon, my mother sat me down on our blue couch, took both my hands, and spoke like we were agreeing on oxygen. Always speak the truth, even when it's hard. She said it like a blessing and a warning, like she was handing me a key I wouldn't know I needed until I reached the locked door. Promise me. I promised. I didn't know the cost yet. Then came the cough. It wasn't a big thing. Not at first. It just lingered when it should have packed up and left. The color drained from her face, the naps got longer. Dad burned toast because Mom didn't come out of bed, and the kitchen felt wrong without her moving through it like a song. Doctors said stress, maybe a virus, maybe something with her heart, maybe this, maybe that. A carousel of maybes that left us dizzy and nowhere. Meanwhile, the doorbell chimed more than usual. Meanwhile, the soups got special. Gladys showed up with fresh bread, still warm inside the paper, with teas in a porcelain pot I'd never seen before, with soups. She said we're easy on the stomach. She straightened a frame every time she walked past it. She moved our mugs to a different shelf because it made more sense. She started calling my father by his first name in a tone that felt like a claim. Everyone in the building said we were lucky to have her. People love helpers. They love a tidy story. They love to say, "What would you do without her?" So you nod, because grief has already taken your fight. Pattern interrupt, because this atters. Helpful isn't always helping. One night, I woke up to a quiet so loud, it pressed on my ears. There was a slice of light under my door, the kind that means someone forgot to turn the kitchen lamp off, and my feet found the cold hall floor like they'd practiced this walk. I stopped at the corner, looked into our kitchen, and there she was alone, stirring a pot of the only soup Mom could keep down. I watched her reach into her purse, pull out a small brown bottle, look over her shoulder, unscrew the cap, tip something into the pot, stir, slide the bottle back into the purse like it had its own bedroom in there. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I didn't sleep. If it were you, what would you have done right then? Run to your father and shake him awake, or do what I did? Crawl back into bed. Stare at the ceiling and feel the floor under your life tilt a few degrees you couldn't correct. Morning made everything worse. Mom's skin looked thin as paper. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it, and the doctor's words about critical hours felt like a clock. We couldn't see. We went to the hospital fast. The beeps were steady. The lines on the monitor climbed like mountains, and then flattened like fields. Nurses moved with that practiced calm that makes you understand how many times they've watched a room break. Dad held my hand. I held Mom's hand. And at 4:17 a.m., the beep turned into a hum that sounded like a door closing on a long hallway. I don't remember the doctor's exact words. I just remember the weight of them, and how my chest tried to become a cave to hold them all. She arrived an hour later with coffee muffins, and grief arranged on her face like makeup. Dad told her the bag fell. Muffins bounced along the tile. She covered her mouth, said no, 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 and then I saw it. A flicker at the corner of her lips. Not pain, not pity. A smile that existed for one heartbeat, and then pretended not to. You can tell yourself you imagined it. I didn't. 3 days after the funeral. Black clothes, white lilies, the air tasting like perfume and salt. Pastor Mike said beautiful things that felt like trying to fold the ocean into a napkin. People told stories about my mother's kindness, the way she made birthdays feel like miracles. After the service, they came back to our apartment because grief collects people like magnets, collect paper clips. Gladys ran the reception the way a headwaiter runs a Saturday night. Plates here, drinks there. Let me take your coat. Don't worry about the kitchen. I've got it. The chorus swelled again. What would you do without her? I wanted to answer. I didn't. That night she came into my room and shut the door softly like kindness, and then dropped the mask so fast I thought it hit the floor. Listen, you little brat. Your father needs me. Try to get between us, and you'll regret it. My back went cold. I opened my mouth to scream, and then Dad stood in the doorway and the mask was back. Everything's fine. Just talking about feelings. Grief is confusing for children. Her voice honeyed again. Yeah, that happened. If you're wondering why I didn't tell my father, I tried. But grief had eaten the part of him that could take one more hard thing. And every time my sentence started, his eyes said, "Please, no, not now." Adults have limits we pretend not to have. The next day, while she chopped garlic and hummed a tune that made my skin crawl, I unzipped her purse. My hands shook so much I could hear my heartbeat in my knuckles. Wallet, tissues, keys, breath, mints. And there it was. The brown bottle, exactly where I'd seen her tuck it away. The label said, digitalis. I didn't know the word, but I knew the shape of the truth. I slid it into my pocket, into my desk under drawings and homework pages, like leaves on a shallow grave. And then I stood there, listening for footsteps, for a shout, for anything. And it didn't come. My mother raised me to know stealing is wrong. Sometimes stealing is saving. I called Aunt Margaret that night from Mom's office because the room still smelled like her peppermint hand cream, and it calmed me down enough to talk. Aunt Margaret had flown in for the funeral, hugged me so tight my ribs complained, and told me to call day or night. "What is digitalis?" I asked, spelling it out, and the line went quiet. In that way, people go quiet when the room gets colder. It's a heart medicine, in tiny doses poison if someone doesn't know what they're doing. "Where did you see it?" she asked, and I told her everything. The midnight soup, the bottle, the smile that wasn't a smile, the threat, all of it. "Keep it hidden," she said. "Don't tell anyone yet, not even your father." "I'm coming." She did. She arrived with a suitcase and a look on her face that meant we were going to push the ocean uphill if we had to. Dad was relieved, because grief makes you grab any hand that feels steady. For the first time in weeks, I felt like a grown-up had walked into the dark room and turned on a light. Aunt Margaret cooked dinner that night and told Gladys we had it thanks. The smile on Gladys's face slipped a millimeter, then clicked back in place. Noted, our house split into two quiet sides. You could miss if you didn't know what you were watching. Aunt Margaret and me on one side of the kitchen island, Gladys, and her tote on the other. Polite words with sharp edges, who chooses the picture for the hallway frame, who decides which casserole gets warmed up first, who speaks first when Dad comes home and asks, "How are my girls?" Control doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it just gets there first. Aunt Margaret made calls I didn't know you could make. She got copies of Mom's medical records and learned the hospital had saved blood samples because sometimes there are good habits in the world. She paid a private lab to run tests. While we waited, we watched. I saw Gladys spray my mother's perfume on her wrists and close her eyes like she was stepping into a role. I saw her wear my mother's sweater and sit in my mother's chair, flipping through my mother's photo albums with a small, satisfied smile. I heard her whisper into her phone from the guest bathroom. "This is ridiculous that sister won't leave. I've worked too hard to let her ruin this." And when she stepped out and saw me in the hallway, a crack ran through her expression and then sealed over. The mask leaks when pressure rises. 2 days earlier than expected, a manila envelope arrived, and the air changed. Aunt Margaret read the report, first pressed her lips together, and handed it to me even though I was 9, because truth doesn't check birth certificates. Digitalis, high levels over several weeks. Not stress, not virus, not some unknowable act of God. Poison. If stories have hinges that was ours, suspicion turned into evidence, and once a story turns like that, it doesn't turn back. We called a detective not through 911, through a friend, of a friend, of a friend. The kind of connection Aunt Margaret could conjure out of thin air. His name was James Morrison, his voice said. He'd seen rooms like ours, and he listened without interrupting, then asked sharp questions, then told us what to do. "Don't confront her alone," he said. "Make it public. Make it undeniable. Let the room hold the truth with you." He'd come in plain clothes. 3rd row on the left, blue tie. When the time came, he'd stand up. The plan felt cold, but grief had taught me that warmth without a plan is how you fall asleep in a snowstorm. That night, I went into my mother's office, sat at her desk, and opened the journal I'd always been told not to read. I know boundaries privacy, but grief changes the rules about what the living need to survive. 2 weeks before she got sick, my mother had written about Gladys, about how sometimes she caught her looking at Dad in a way that made her stomach drop, about how she rearranged our home when Mom wasn't looking, about a feeling that wouldn't let her rest. If anything happens to me, she wrote, my girl will speak the truth. I read that line 3 times for 5, and I could hear her voice in my ear. I tucked that page into my pocket next to the bottle because sometimes proof is a voice, and sometimes it's a vial, and sometimes, you need both. Pattern interrupt. If you're still with me, stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. And tell me where you're watching from, city and state or country, if you're far away, because I want to know how far the truth can travel. We staged the memorial like a careful storm. Pastor Mike first, then neighbors, then Dad, then Gladys. Let her stand at the front of the room and braid her performance into the air. Let the room nod along. Let the story she wanted harden just enough to crack. The detective would sit where he could move fast without making a scene. Aunt Margaret would hold the lab report and the journal page. I would hold the bottle and my promise. We even thought about doors and where people would stand when the air broke. Planning isn't cruelty. Planning is mercy for the truth. The hall smelled like lilies and candle wax, and the kind of perfume people save for important days. Rows of chairs, a table with my mother's photo in a silver frame. Candles ticked down the way time does when you pay attention. Pastor Mike spoke like he knew the right words, and maybe he did. Maybe all the words were right, and none of them could do what we needed. People stood and told stories about my mother's kindness, and her laugh, about her habit of leaving handwritten notes in lunch boxes, about her blueberry muffins that probably wouldn't taste like hers from now on, no matter who baked them. My father spoke without his paper, and grief poured out of him, and a voice I had never heard, a voice that made me want to run, and made me want to stay. And then they called her up. Grace's best friend. She walked like a question you already knew the answer to. A tissue in her hand, a practiced tremble in her voice. She called my mother, her sister. She promised to take care of us. She looked at my father with the kind of softness that should come with a warning label. People nodded because people love a story that tells them they're safe. She lifted her glass of water and said, "To Grace may her love live on through the family she adored." I stood. My legs shook like paper. My voice didn't. "You're lying. You aren't her friend. You killed my mom." You could feel the room split down the middle like someone had drawn a line across the carpet. A glass hit the floor and shattered. Someone said my name like a question and a prayer. She turned her head like she was listening to a child confuse a dream with a memory. "Your daughter is confused. She told the room Reeve does that. I'll take her outside." "No," I said. And I pulled the brown bottle out and held it up so it caught the light. "I saw you pour this into her soup the night before the hospital, and she died with this in her blood." Aunt Margaret moved to my side and raised the report so the official letterhead caught the crowd's attention before the words did. An independent lab found digitalis in Grace Thompson's blood at levels consistent with poisoning over several weeks, she said, and her voice didn't wobble once. Then she read the journal line, the one about instinct, and how a home starts to feel different when someone walks in and tries to rearrange the soul of it. People are not good at hiding their faces when the truth walks into the room. I watched shock, then doubt. Then the beginning of belief spread like ripples from where we stood. Detective Morrison stood up, the blue tie, a small flag. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me to answer some questions." he said quietly. And for a heartbeat, she had a choice: step down, like a person who wants to be believed, or step back like a person who is cornered. She chose the second. She stared at me at the exits at my father, and then words poured out of her like a dam giving way. "I did it for us," she blurted. "Don't you see? She was always tired, distracted. I would have put you first. I would have been perfect for you. I freed you." My father took a step back like the ground had moved under him. "You killed my wife," he said. "You murdered the mother of my child." And in that moment, the room's temperature dropped 10 degrees. The detective moved, the rights were read, the cuffs clicked, and when she tried to run, 2 men who knew my father from work stepped in front of the side door without needing to be asked. Sometimes a community is there, even when you didn't think you had one. The hall emptied slowly. People crying. People angry at themselves for clapping for the wrong person. People hugging my father and calling me brave, like the word could fill the space my mother used to fill. My father looked at me like he was seeing a different planet and his own reflection at the same time. "You knew," he said. "You tried to tell me." I nodded. I tried. He fell to his knees, sound breaking out of him, in a way that made the pastor turn away to give us privacy. And I held him while Aunt Margaret stood above us like a guardrail. If you think that was the end, it wasn't. Justice is not a clean line. It is a long, messy thread. You follow through rooms you didn't know existed. Reporters camped outside our building microphones, like little black mouths. The detective came by with updates. The police searched Gladys's apartment and found a scrapbook full of photos of our family, some taken through windows, a journal where she wrote out a plan, like it was prayer notes about my father's routine, about the times my mother met her editor, about the best days to bring soup. Obsession looks like devotion until you turn the light on. We moved. Not because we were running, because the air in that apartment was heavy with things we couldn't wash out. The new place was smaller, brighter, with a grocery store downstairs, and a park where afternoons felt like forgiveness if you looked at them from the right angle. Aunt Margaret found an apartment 2 floors down and said she wasn't leaving until both our hearts stopped sounding like alarms. Dad started therapy and a support group for people who had lost someone to violence. He said, "Your mother's death won't be meaningless." And for once, it didn't sound like a sentence people say, because they don't know what else to do. I started therapy too, with a woman who told me bravery and fear can hold hands. That nightmares are a brain's awkward filing system, that healing isn't a straight road. It's a path with switchbacks and loose rocks, where some days you move an inch and it still counts. I wrote in a journal like my mother, not because I thought someone would read it after I was gone, but because sometimes a page is the only witness you can handle that day. 3 months after the memorial, we went to court. Dad didn't want me there, but I needed to finish what I started. The courtroom felt like a church built for a different God would, polished by hands that had gripped benches for decades. Flags a seal on the wall that meant rules mattered here. When I took the stand, my knees knocked, but my voice remembered the promise. The prosecutor asked me to tell the story, and I did the midnight soup. The bottle, the phone whispers. The journal page, the memorial, the confession. The defense asked me if I could have been dreaming, if I misunderstood what I saw, if my grief made me invent a villain I could punch instead of the sky. "No," I said, and the word sat there like a stone they couldn't kick out of the way. They played the video someone had taken on their phone at the memorial. You can hear me. You can see the bottle. You can watch her face change in real time, from sympathy to rage, to the kind of love that doesn't care if it has to kill what's in the way. The jury watched with faces they didn't mean to show. The lab tech explained digitalis in words the jury could feel, not just understand. The detective walked through the evidence. Aunt Margaret read more of my mother's journal. My father told the court how the helpful neighbor had taken over our home in tiny steps until the home wasn't ours anymore. 5 days. Guilty. Life without parole. The judge talked about cruelty and calculation and betrayal of trust, about how the law has words for what love should never become. At sentencing, she looked at me and said, "Your mother would be proud of you." I still don't know what to do with that sentence. Maybe it was a last attempt to stitch herself into our story. Maybe it was the only truth she had left, that my mother raised a daughter who could hold a room still, with a bottle in her hand and the word no in her mouth. Maybe both things can sit next to each other and not shake hands. People ask me if it felt good when the verdict came down and if the gavel sounded like closure. I tell them the truth. It sounded like a door closing on a house I never wanted to live in. Good, yes, in the way clean water tastes good after days of thirst, and also complicated, because justice is a meal that fills you without tasting like what you were hungry for. Mom was still gone. The blue couch still held a dent we wouldn't fill. The kitchen still felt like a stage where the lead had walked off. So we learned how to live in a world where the worst thing had already happened, and the best things were still possible. Dad kept his promise to tell me stories about my mother until the color came back into them. We cooked her recipes and burned some and laughed anyway. We made new traditions that didn't pretend to replace the old ones, just sat beside them and tried to keep us warm. I wore a locket with my mother on one side and me on the other, and on days when the world asked more than I had, I held it between my fingers and reminded myself that courage is a muscle, and mine wasn't done growing. Let me say something that might make you argue with me in the comments, which is exactly what I want. We talk a lot about stranger danger, but the truth is most of the time it's friendly danger. Helpful danger. The neighbor who brings soup and rearranges your kitchen while she rearranges your life. Why do we give obsession such polite names when it wears decent clothes? Why do we dismiss a child's alarm because it doesn't come in the language we prefer? Why do systems built to keep people safe put so much weight on adult certainty and so little on the instincts of a 9-year-old girl who sees what no one else can afford to see? Do you think that's fair? If it were you, would you have stood up in that room and said the word that made the room fall apart? Would you have pulled the bottle out in front of your father and a pastor and 50 people who thought they knew how the story went? I didn't because I liked drama. I did it because my mother asked me to, because her last words to me were, "Tell the truth. Always. Not when it's easy. Not when you'll be applauded always." That promise was louder than fear. I know someone watching this is sitting on a truth that scares them. Maybe it's not about poison in courts. Maybe it's about a workplace that's slowly crushing you. A friend who keeps borrowing pieces of your life that never find their way back. A family secret that sits at the table like a guest. Everyone has agreed not to look at. Say it out loud to yourself tonight, then to one person tomorrow, then to the room. When you can stand, you don't have to do it the way I did, public and messy. You just have to do it the way you can. The truth is heavy, but it's lighter when more hands hold it. Before I go, I want to open a door on something that deserves more than a sentence at the end of a story. Loneliness is not an excuse for violence, but it is sometimes the road people travel to get there. We have to learn the difference between compassion and permission, between helping and handing over, between being neighborly and giving someone the keys to your family because they look like they know where things go. Communities are not just casseroles and rides to the airport. They're also the quiet questions we ask each other when the picture doesn't look right. Are you okay? Is this too much? Why is she here so much? Would my mother be alive if one more adult had asked one more impolite question? That is a door I will always wonder about when I walk past it. So now it's your turn. If you've ever spoken up and weren't believed at first, tell me what happened and what you wish someone had done differently. If you think I was wrong to open that journal, wrong to steal that bottle, say it and tell me why, because ethics gets real when it knocks on your own door. If you've ever been the person who helped a family and felt the line blur, talk about how you kept yourself on the right side of it. Drop your city and your thoughts, because I want to see where this conversation goes, how far the truth can travel when we carry it together, like this. If you believe truth beats lies, share it with someone who needs a little courage tonight, and subscribe. If you want more stories where justice shows up without asking permission, stick around this channel, because the next story starts with a knock that sounds harmless. And trust me, you won't see what's coming.